And good evening from Philadelphia. Frank here with 2-for-1 Tuesday. We've got another episode of UFO News Network Sunday this evening after our show earlier today. It's been a big day for us. And let me bring in my exhausted co-host, the one and only Chant Hanna, to introduce our special evening guest. Go ahead, Chant. Go get him.
Thank you. Thank you, Frank, for that introduction. Yes, we have had a two-for show today. We did have Tom Rogan from the McLaughlin Group on earlier today. That was an interesting show. And now we have a wonderful guest by the name of Paco Chierici. And he flew an A6E Intruders and F-14A Tomcats during his 10-year active duty career. He flew the F-5 Tiger II for a further 10 years as a bandit concurrent with his employment as a commercial pilot. Paco is currently a 737 captain. Paco is also the creator and producer of the award-winning naval aviation documentary Speed and Angels. Paco has written articles for various international domestic magazines as well as regular contributions to Fighter Sweep. He has signed with an agent to represent the sale of his debut novel, Lions in the Sky, a novel aviation thriller. Paco has the standard panoply of medals and ribbons, but his proudest accomplishment is the Top Nugget Award for landing grades from his first deployment. Paco, I would first like to thank you very much for your service to our great country. I have family in the military, and they're Army and Navy. One is a pilot also. We appreciate your service to our great country, and I would like to thank you on the show.
Yeah, well, thank you, Hannah. It was my pleasure. I enjoyed, Chant. It was my pleasure. I enjoyed every minute of it, and I wish I could go back and do it again.
Great. And I also want you to correct me on something because I think I may have missaid something during your bio. You flew an A6E Intruders and F-14A Tomcats and then F-5 Tiger II. Can you tell me, did I say any of that correctly, or could you just be more clear about that for our listeners if I wasn't clear enough?
Yeah, no, that's correct. I flew the A6 Intruder for my first deployment, my first tour, and then I transitioned over to the F-14 Tomcat, the one that's famous from the first Top Gun movie.
Great.
And I flew the F-5, which actually was the bad guy, the MiG-28 in the Top Gun movie. So
wonderful.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, I just wanted to ask you, and first start off with, could you please share with us a little bit about your background, just who you are as a person, and why did you join the Navy to become a pilot? Why was that of interest to you?
Sure. I was born in Bethesda. I spent a little bit of time growing up in Italy, and then ended up going to high school in Rochester, New York. I needed some money to go to college, and I was turned towards the Navy ROTC scholarship, and I'm super grateful that happened. Nobody in my family really was in the military, certainly no aviators in my family. And just almost purely by fortune, ended up going to Boston University on a Navy scholarship. And the summer before my sophomore year, again, I had no aviation experience. I'd never really been in an airplane other than as a passenger. But I got a backseat ride in an F-14, and it really changed my life. It was like getting a hit of a drug that you just can't get rid of. And I fell in love in an instant, and I've been involved in flying fighters and big airplanes ever since.
Great. You also recently wrote a book, and it's called Lions in the Sky, and I would also like to encourage our listeners to please go to lionsofthesky.com.
Yeah.
So it's the title of the book is Lions of the Sky, and the website is lionsofthesky.com. And just an aside, I wanted to let our listeners know also to please go to fightersweep.com. That's a website that he is associated with regarding writing articles. Could you please give us a summary of that book and what the essence of it is?
Sure. It's at its very core, it's a naval aviation thriller. So anybody that's interested in the classic Tom Clancy techno thrillers with lots of great action and geopolitical forces moving two different sides towards conflict will be interested in it. But for me, it's a much more personal story than that. It's really about the pilots themselves and how they deal with going through training to fly the F-18, and how they deal with some of their interpersonal issues. There's There's some women in the class that have come up against some sexism, and there's my male lead has some issues, women that he's got to come to terms with, and all of this obviously is set against the drama, the natural inherent drama of flying fighters in the Navy. You've got to learn how to dogfight and drop bombs and fly low levels, and your final exam is landing an aircraft carrier. So there's every chapter is just filled with both physical and interpersonal drama, and it all leads up to this big conflict in the South China Sea, sort of a real world dilemma and issue that comes to a boil in the novel.
Yes, I saw that it got some really great reviews. Also, I wanted to ask you, as a military pilot, how do you discern the differences between stars, drones, unmanned aerial vehicles, satellites, anything else being flung or flown into the sky that is anomalous in nature? How do you tell the difference between all of that and a possible anomaly in the sky that is distinctly different from a star, a drone, an unmanned aerial vehicle that or a satellite as a pilot?
Sure. Well, I just want to be clear. I've never seen anything that you would consider to be an anomalous vehicle. Anomalous vehicle. That's not an easy one to say. I wrote that article, and it's a great story, but I personally have never witnessed anything like that. But to answer your question, stars don't move, certainly not to the naked eye. They obviously move across the sky as the Earth rotates. Satellites do move. They look like stars, but they move. You can notice them. You can just watch them as they track across the sky, and you can do that in your backyard. A drone acts like an airplane, so it flies the same as an airplane. It just has a pilot in it, obviously. You become accustomed to the manner in which objects move. Airplanes, helicopters, fighter planes versus transport planes versus airliners. They all have sort of a very predictable flight pattern or flight path to them. So it's not as difficult as you may think. And at night, everybody's certainly things that fly, manned vehicles and drones have a light pattern to them, the green and the red lights and the white tail lights. So it's fairly easy to distinguish between them.
Now, you explained radar recently on an interview. Can you share that explanation again? And also, how do you fit FLIR and radar into the topic of the tic-tac topic? What is your understanding of FLIR, radar, and the tic-tac incident?
Okay, that's a broad topic.
Yes.
So the way a radar works, and the way I described it in that other show, is that if you could imagine sitting in a dark room and say like a 30-foot room, and at the other end of the room there's a person. And if you turn on a flashlight, it's like the same principle as a radar. It emits energy, and you see what that energy bounces back to you. So if you turn on a flashlight and you sweep it slowly back and forth across the room, you'll see that other person, but you don't see them necessarily very clearly. You can't get a lot of data on them. You know that they're there. You don't know if they're moving and what speed they're moving at, other than every, say, 3 to 4 seconds when your beam sweeps across them. And that's range while scan or track while scan, depending on the radar type, where the radar keeps sweeping back and forth and tries to build up information on returns that it sees. And a computer will interpolate that data and try to build what's called a track file. Now, if you want to target that specific thing, you will take your flashlight and just hold it steady at that person across the room, or that your radar, the equivalent is the radar holding steady on a aerial target. And now all of a sudden you get all this great information on this one thing. You can tell exactly its altitude, its airspeed, its flight path vector, but you lose the perspective of everything else in the room. So you're getting really great data on that one thing, and it's called single target track. It makes sense when you understand the name. But now you're essentially blind to all the other stuff that's going on. And obviously both those radar modes, and there's a variety of other radar modes as well, but those are the two broad ones. Both those radar modes have incredible utility, and you use them, for when they're most aptly suited. The FLIR is an acronym for forward-looking infrared. And there's, again, a variety of FLIR pods, in the world. The one that the Super Hornet uses and used at the time of the Tic Tac incident also has a laser in it, and its function is to find a target on the ground. And you can use either a camera mode. It's got 3 different modes. It's got a camera mode, which is just a black and white contrast camera. A infrared mode, which is, it looks similar, but everything's inverse because you're looking for heat signatures. And then this laser that's going to be used for ranging and targeting. And so when you're given a target on the ground, when you're flying a Super Hornet around, you're linked up a target, or you find a target and you slew the FLIR. Slew means you take whatever device it is, whether it's your radar or your weapon seeker head, or in this case, the FLIR, and you slave it to something else to put the cursors over that target. And now you're flying over the target, say it's a tank at 30,000 feet, and you can turn the laser on, and now you can drop a laser-guided bomb on that target very precisely. And that's what the FLIR is designed to do. And you can do it at in the nighttime with the infrared, or if it's daytime, you could use just the camera mode. So the video that people see of the Tic Tac incident with the FLIR switching back and forth between black contrast and white contrast is a FLIR being used in a method that it wasn't really designed to be used for, which is air-to-air. There's a different infrared device that is used for that, which doesn't even come into play in this incident. But this FLIR pod was, slaved to the radar track that the Wizzo got of the Tic Tac, and he was able to, from far further away than the FLIR is normally designed to be used, he was able to capture images of this thing hovering, and then switch back and forth between camera contrast and IR contrast, and ascertain that there was no infrared signature coming out of this Tic Tac. It was just hovering there, defying gravity of its own volition. There was no wings, there was no rotors, there was no engine spewing out any kind of gases. He was too far away to get any of the real details that the visual guys got earlier, with their eyeballs. So he could see a blob, but he couldn't really see whether or not there were windows or wings or anything like that.
Yeah, just to jump in and be clear here, as far as I know, there were roughly three flights that went out and engaged this. The first one, a Marine pilot by the name of Douglas Kurth had engaged the Tic Tac. Then your friend and the guy who you got the story from, David Fravor, along with a female pilot, they had a second encounter, and then it was on the third encounter by a pilot named Chad Underwood, I believe, who actually caught the video that has become so famous. Is that about right?
Roughly. So I'll give you the specifics of it. Doug Kurth never actually saw the Tic Tac, so he didn't actually engage it. He was vectored out to go check it out.
Okay.
And he actually saw the water, the surface of the ocean, disturbed in a very unusual pattern. So it was 11:30 in the morning on a Southern California day, a beautiful day, and the water was glassy smooth except for this one patch of water that was kind of foaming as if there was something underneath it,
okay,
bubbling, boiling. And that's all that Kurth saw. He flew over that, he saw it, and then he noticed that Dave Fravor and his wingman were coming in, and he was asked to leave. So as he exited, he looked back over his shoulder and noticed that the water was now smooth. And that was his experience with the incident. And then, yes, Dave Fravor and his Wizzo, which is the weapon system operator in the back of his airplane, and then his wingman and her Wizzo. So there's 4 people.
And again, just to jump in, her Wizzo was Mr. Slate. Is that about right, or was that Dave? Or are you not sure? Okay, sorry about that.
I mean, I'm not going to share the name. I don't know who wants to have their name put out. I just know that Doug Kurth and Dave Fravor are they've been associated with this. Obviously, Dave Fravor's comfortable talking about it now. But so those 4 people actually saw the Tic Tac. They engaged with it. Dave engaged with it. They had a minute or so encounter with this thing before it zoomed away. And then the last one, the Hornet that captured the Tic Tac on the FLIR footage, he never actually saw it, or they never actually saw it, because it was, again, 2 people, a pilot and a whizzer. They never laid eyes on it. They only saw it on radar, and they were able to pick it up, like I said, on the FLIR at the outer ranges of the FLIR's capabilities. So that's why the video is kind of fuzzy and indistinct.
All right. And one last thing. Going back to the lady pilot, there was a show that TTSA, Tom DeLonge and Lou Elizondo's group had put together, and she appeared, didn't reveal her name, and stayed in the shadows. But were you a little surprised she went that far in going forward and telling her side of the story?
No. I mean, no. I first of all, I haven't seen it, so I don't know exactly.
Okay.
I'm not surprised that she did that. It's an incredible event. I think it's something that people that witnessed it are they're excited to talk about, or at least share with the world. But she clearly values her privacy. She may or may not still be in the Navy, so she doesn't want to be bombarded with interview requests or anything like that. So she was there to share her bit of the story, and then fade back into the background.
And your involvement with FighterSweep.com is what's kind of led you to get some attention in the UFO community. Can you tell us a little bit about the site and your involvement with it, and why you decided to write that particular story?
Sure. Well, in 2015, so my good friend is the owner and operator of FighterSweep, Brandon Webb, and he owns a variety of military affiliated or associated websites. And he asked me to come in and be the interim editor. And I told him I could give him a summer. So I was the editor of FighterSweep for about 4 or 5 months. And one of the first articles that I wanted to write, and it's a story that I'd heard for years and years, since probably 2007, was Dave Fravor's UFO article. I just loved it, and I'd heard it so many times, and Dave reminded me, actually, I talked to him recently preparing for the show. He reminded me that at one point I called him, this was probably in 2010 or 11, I called him up while I was having a party at my house and asked him over speakerphone to tell everybody at the party the story. And he was kind enough to do so. So it was a great event at this party. But it's just such a phenomenal and fascinating story. And at the time, it hadn't been talked about, and nobody had really had any sort of UFO experience of any credibility, at least from where I sat as a someone who doesn't really follow this world like you guys do. And I knew this guy really well, and I knew that there were all these. I knew all the circumstances surrounding this story, and it just blew my mind. So once I had this the ability to write like a professional journalistic article, I went ahead and did that, and I called Dave up to refresh all the points that I was going to write about, and that's when I found out that the ATIP had done an investigation, or O&I is what they call themselves, but Dave believes that they were ATIP, and they had completed that in 2009, and through a variety of different means, I was able to get my hands on the ATIP report before I did my article. So my article is basically the redacted version of the ATIP report.
How were you able to get the ATIP report?
Just some folks that were able to send it to me.
Okay. Now, did Dave have any problem going on the record with you?
Not at all. I mean, I'd heard the story forever. And again, I knew so many of the people that were involved in the story that, to me, it was just the credibility was incredibly high. And I just wanted to get the details of it, the actual nuts and bolts of the story, so that I could write it in a logical manner. So, I mean, if I don't know if you guys share that kind of stuff, but if anybody wants to read the article, which again is basically the ATIP report without names in it, you go to FighterSweep, or you go Google "There I Was, the X-Files edition," and it pops right up. So it's a thorough, comprehensive article without anybody's names other than Dave.
I wanted to let our listeners know just a little bit before Frank asks his next question, something that might be obvious to some listeners and not to others, that when we were talking about he or him at first, when Paco was saying that, he was talking about Commander Fravor. And so Commander Fravor, he piloted the lead Super Hornet, and he's commanding officer of the Strike Fighter Squadron 41. So just want to make that clear who Commander David Fravor is. And Frank, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, the next question I was going to ask was related to the article itself. Now, that article was cited in the, introductory kickoff of the To the Stars Academy, and they took a little bit of heat because they used an image from the article that was basically a number one Mylar balloon. And Chris Mellon had suggested that was an actual picture of the Tic Tac. Can you explain a little bit about the process in terms of how the art was chosen for that particular article?
Yeah, actually, that's a great question. So when in the previous recountings of the story, I would always show that Tic Tac video last. So I would tell, sit around a bar or whatever, have some friends over for dinner and tell them the story, or have Dave call on a speakerphone and tell the story. And then I wouldn't show him that Tic Tac video till the end, because it really doesn't make it. It doesn't have any weight to it without the context of the story or the preamble. And as I was calling Dave and getting ready to write the article, one of the things he told me was, and that video was always on YouTube. It had been on YouTube since, I think, 2007, 2008. It was just out there. And it was unremarkable if you didn't have the story wrapped around it. So in the process of writing the article in 2015, I discovered that ATIP or somebody had taken that video down off of YouTube. I think it's since back up again, but at the time it wasn't, and so we were struggling to find some art at Fighter Sweep, and somebody just threw some standard UFO art up there. So,
and you had mentioned the video being up, and it was for a while at someone had sent it to a German-based special effects art house, basically, and they had it uploaded for a while. It seems like maybe somebody leaked that a long time ago. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I'm purely speculating here. I have no information on this, but I'm guessing that the Wizzo had kept a copy of it, which probably is not 100% legal, and anonymously put it up on YouTube just because it was such an amazing thing and he wanted to share it. But I don't know that Wizzo. I've never met him before. I'm just purely guessing. I'm using my own experience as a former naval aviator. That's probably something that I would have done. So.
And since all this has come out, it's been really 2 years now. Today is the 2-year anniversary of the famous New York Times article featuring Dave and some of the TTS people, Lou Elizondo as well. What do you think about all this?
My thoughts haven't really changed that much. I mean, I wrote the article 2 years before the New York Times wrote their article. And again, I've heard the stories for well over 10 years now. So I'm comfortable with the way the story unfolds. I have no answers or really any conjecture as to what they saw, what the radar on the Princeton saw, what they were wrapped up with flying, sort of a semi-dogfight there. Dave, I will tell you that Dave does not think it's of this world. And to me, that carries a lot of weight. But again, that's just his opinion. There's certain things that are facts and certain things that are opinions. And he does not believe it's, terrestrial. It's, I guess, by default, extraterrestrial.
Fair enough. One of the things that he had mentioned was that when he got close to the rendezvous point with this Tic Tac, his radar was jammed. And can you tell us a little bit about, does that kind of thing happen often? That seems kind of unusual.
Yeah, no, it is very unusual. Yeah, I've only had mine jammed, a couple times during exercises, and you kind of knew it was going to come. Um, and again, I'm not sure whether they were jammed or whether the radar just couldn't grab a lock on this thing. Although the Princetons could, and in certain modes, I guess the second wave of Super Hornets was able to get a weak track on it. So I'm not sure. I do know that nobody was ever able to get a single target track on it. And again, that's that when you hold the flashlight on that one place to get the most information possible. So nobody ever was able to get a single target track on it.
Chant, go ahead. What do you got?
Yeah, actually, I do have something I wanted to ask him. I'm just going to it right now. Yeah, I wanted to talk about the USS Princeton. Wanted to know if you could let us know what you think may have happened to their radar data regarding this incident.
Well, again, so I wasn't there. I've never been on the Princeton. I don't have a tremendous amount of experience with, either the Spy One or, cruisers and destroyers in general. All I can tell you is what I heard from my friend, Dave, who knew the commanding officer of the Princeton very well. They had dinner aboard the carrier. He's a high-ranking department head. So all the commanding officers would have meetings and dinners frequently, many times a week. And they talked about the incident, and he never once inferred that anybody came out to his ship and anybody took any tapes or anything like that. So, again, I don't know that happened or didn't happen. I'm just telling you what Dave said. Dave does not believe that happened. It doesn't make any sense to me. Again, I was in the Navy for 20 years. These people would talk about stuff like that. They're not movie stereotypes. They're real human beings, and if somebody came out to your ship, you would tell your friend. So
right.
Let me jump in here. This is one question I definitely want to ask. You mentioned everybody being human beings, and one thing in my very brief experience in working as an outside contractor on a naval base, one of the highlights of the day, it seemed, among all the people in the Navy at this particular base, was basically busting each other's balls throughout the day. And you had mentioned Dave had gotten a little bit of heat from some of his fellow shipmates after this had happened. And can you tell us a little bit about that? And just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. So it's a ruthless, environment where people get grief for any little misstep or any slight or perceived sign of weakness. But in the best possible way. It's just, it's like a fraternity and sorority all mixed up together, and everybody's giving each other grief the whole time. When he landed back on the Nimitz, and he went in, after every mission, you go into debrief with the carrier operations intelligence folks. And he went in there to do his debrief, and all the intelligence guys were wearing tinfoil hats, which is hilarious. Yeah. And it's also, it's just indicative of how people approached the topic at the time. In 2004, UFOs were not a real thing, or at least not in people's minds. And had Dave not been as senior and as serious and respected a person as he is and was, and had there not been three other witnesses, nobody would have believed him. Period. Even with the Princeton radar footage and all that kind of stuff. So, or radar data. The next day, every day there's an air plan put out, and the air plan is kind of a general schedule of events, and the squadrons write their own flight schedules based on this air plan. And the air plan has a cartoon, and the guys that write it will take a Gary Larson cartoon, like a Far Side cartoon, or Calvin and Hobbes or something like that, and whatever fits the mood, and then they'll change the dialogue to make it, fit the specific incident. And they're always sort of gently ribbing, or maybe less than gently ribbing, somebody, whoever the target of that cartoon is. And on the next day's air plan, Dave was lampooned a little bit. There was a picture of a UFO that had crashed in the ocean, and aliens were swimming away while there's an F-18 flying away. And the caption is something to the effect that the UFO never stood a chance against the amazing fighter pilot, Dave Fravor.
But nothing that rose to the level of being abusive, and no negative ramifications on anyone's career that you're aware of.
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
No.
Okay. I have a question for you. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to ask you a follow-up because you were talking about, you guys were talking about a UFO, the topic of it being a threat. If you don't think the Tic Tac or a UFO is a threat, then what would you say to those who are concerned that this type of encounter might happen off the coast of Iran, for example? Couldn't there be a possibility of an encounter with another government who might turn out differently than what happened with ours with the Tic Tac? Could they respond differently? Other governments could be armed. Is there a possibility of starting a war over something like that? By the way, those two last questions I just asked came from Phoenix MUFON, and that was the one about the Princeton and the radar data, and then this one from them regarding if you don't think the Tic Tac is a UFO or a UFO is a threat, then what would you say to those who are concerned that this type of encounter could happen, for example, off the coast of Iran? Couldn't there be a possibility of an encounter with another government that might take that threat as a threat and take it very seriously and respond in a manner that could be World War III related or oriented or warlike?
Okay. I don't know whether the Tic Tacs are a threat or not. I do know that one of the reasons that ATIP investigation from 2009 was commissioned was because, they wanted to see what this thing was or learn as much as they could about it, because none of the carriers' defenses were able to deal with it, right? So if it had been a threat on the carrier strike group or against the F-18s, there's nothing that we could have done. We couldn't have tracked it. We couldn't have shot anything at it. We were defenseless against it, and that's what the investigation kind of centered on, or at least the launching point for it. Whether I think another nation such as Iran could launch World War III based on a Tic Tac, going into their waters, I mean, that's a stretch. I don't know. First of all, I don't know that Iran could start World War III. They don't have a nuclear weapon. They don't have a military big enough to really achieve that kind of military critical mass to start World War III. China and Russia could start World War III. They have obviously thousands of nuclear weapons, and they have massive militaries, and they could, get other nations involved.
We know that Russia and India, for example, they have a much faster missile than we do. My understanding on that. Regarding any other country, do you feel it's possible that they could view a UFO as a threat and view it in a warlike fashion, or react in that manner?
They may. I mean, I don't know how somebody's going to react. So the Tic Tac, when it was off the coast of San Diego, didn't do anything that could be deemed as offensive, right? It just was. It seemed like it was going about its own business. It wasn't buzzing around the ship. It wasn't, interacting with the Hornets in a way that made them feel really defensive. Like Dave and his wingmen never felt threatened. They were just super curious, and they were aggressively trying to get closer to this thing, but they never thought that they needed to, defend themselves, or they never wished that they had weapons on board or anything like that. They were just like, what the hell is this? And let's go check it out.
Right.
The Princeton, which was tracking the Tic Tac on its radar, it never, at any point, it never felt threatened. In fact, the commanding officer of the ship was like, I don't know what it is, and I really don't care. Now, obviously, that's different now, right? Because we know a little bit more about it, and then there was some other stuff that happened off the East Coast with aircraft off the Roosevelt. But even still, in that instance, nobody ever really felt threatened. Nobody felt it was a curiosity more than anything else. Now, that doesn't mean that the Iranians wouldn't see something floating off their coast and go after it, or the Russians, and you mentioned they have the hypersonic weapons, but they're still in development. And even if you have something that's incredibly fast, it doesn't mean it could target a Tic Tac. It doesn't. And hypersonic is still not going to be anywhere near as fast as multi-Mach, as fast as that Tic Tac was going. So
yeah,
Okay,
just
and then
just
one
to follow.
other question.
No, let me. I want to follow up on that. What Paco was just talking about a little bit. We see once in a while, now and again, video from U.S. Navy ships where they are literally getting buzzed by MiGs. And
Yeah.
I mean, how do they get so close? How does that happen? And what's the usual response to that?
Well, that's been happening, since the end of World War II, since the dawn of the jet age. This is a dance that's been going on beyond the public's view for 60, 70 years. It's just a game that these nations play with us, and we play it with them. We want to go check out a ship, and when you go check it out, you use your FLIR to take as much video as you can and glean as much intelligence information as you can, and they don't like that, so they send a fighter out to intercept many miles away and do a fighter escort. And the rule is you always want to have one of your planes between the ship and the enemy airplane. So it's been going on forever. It's just that, the tools to report this kind of stuff are more sophisticated than they ever were. And there's a 24-hour news channel or a news cycle that is interested in stuff like that. But it's not new. It's certainly not new to the people in the military.
So is that regarded as kind of an annoyance, or is it just, they're doing the same job we are, so we kind of respect a little bit? Or, I mean, what are the feelings on that type of thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's titillating. It's thrilling. Here come. They're coming. They're coming. You can tell. You pick them up on radar. There's this whole network of interconnected intelligence gathering tools, including satellites and human intelligence and, long range radars in Alaska and Nova Scotia and stuff like that. So it's not like they're sneaking up on us. We know they're there. And then you send out a fighter to intercept them a long way away and escort them through their rendezvous with the ship or whatever. And then, like I said, we do the same thing to them. We send P3s to look at the Chinese in the South China Sea and into the Black Sea. We send ships to shadow Russian ships in the Black Sea all the time because those are international waters. So we exercise our rights to fly and sail in international waters, whether they like it or not.
Is it illegal for branches of government to secretly schedule or stack exercises on top of each other?
Illegal, I don't know. It's not done.
Okay.
It doesn't make any sense to do anything like that. I covered this a little bit in a previous discussion, but that's not the way that weapon systems are tested. It doesn't make any sense to do things like that because there's no real benefit to sneaking up on somebody like that. You're not necessarily going to get. You want to test things in a controlled way and increase the challenge of your testing as much as possible, but in a logical and stair-stepped manner. And I think you're alluding to the fact, or the question as to whether or not this was a U.S. Tic Tac, a U.S.-built technology that was testing itself against a carrier strike group. For 100,000 reasons, that doesn't make any sense. The least of which is, you don't want to have these planes come into contact with this thing and then somebody crash and die, and then now for no reason you've killed somebody or 2 people or 4 people. If we built this Tic Tac, if this is U.S. technology, and assuming it's built in Area 51, and it's going to be the most expensive thing that anybody in the world has ever built, then it would be child's play to take a Spy-1 radar like the one that's on the Princeton and bring it out to the desert and have this thing fly against the Spy-1 radar, and to get an F-18 and bring it out to the desert and have the F-18 fly against the Tic Tac. There's no value to that test as it would have been with the 2004 Nimitz incident. That it doesn't make any sense. Nobody would design a test like that.
Understood. So how likely is it? And by the way, that last question was the last question Alaska Phoenix MUFON. So that was a question from their team.
Right.
How likely is it that we can reverse engineer the technology that is seen in these Tic Tac and other UFOs on Earth with our current technology that we may have, given that the ET technology allegedly could be thousands or even million years ahead of our technology? That is from a neuroscientist. That question. I'll read it again. In your opinion,
I got it.
Go ahead.
Well, I will say this: if he is indeed a neuroscientist, then he is far more qualified to answer that question than I am. I'm, just a fighter pilot in the Navy. I would imagine that, if we indeed got our hands on some extraterrestrial tech, it would make the Manhattan Project look, like a kindergarten, group project. We would pull in the best and the brightest from everywhere that we could get our hands on and throw them at this problem. I don't know. I'm not an engineer. I don't know how reverse engineering works other than sort of the obvious. You take a part and you make it again. It would be interesting. That to me, that's an interesting proposition. It'd be kind of cool if that were true, but I have no data on that.
Okay, and that question was from Roger Stankovic. He's the director of Australia MUFON. We have one from Ruben Uriarte, who's the director of MUFON in, I believe it's Northern California. He says, Paco, have you had contact from military pilots from other countries who have had UAP/UFO encounters? If so, do you mind sharing a few of those if you have any to share?
I have not. In fact, I feel like I'm very underwhelming in this UFO world because I've only really had any expertise with this Nimitz incident because I know Dave Fravor really well. I have not had any contact with other people that have had, what I consider credible. I've had some other people come up and say they've seen UFOs, but there's no proof and there's no video, there's no radar returns or anything like that. So, no, the answer would be no.
Okay. Frank, did you have a question? Because I did have one from Irina Scott, Dr.
Yeah,
Irina Scott,
finish up
and
with
she
your
wanted to
questions.
ask about radar. Okay, so Dr. Irina Scott, she worked for the government for a long period of time, and her husband actually worked at Area 51. She says she has a few questions. She says, does anyone know any more about the other objects seen initially, and did anyone tape the returns of AAVs that would drop from the 80K to hover about 50 feet off the water in a matter of seconds and similar acrobatics? Then she wanted to know, is there any information about why you think, I'll just read it as she wrote it. Is there any information about why he thinks his radar was unable to lock on the object when it was so close? I think you kind of already explained that. And what were the jamming indications? I think you may have already gone over that. And has he heard anything about how even newer radar performs? And is there any information that they have equipped ships and planes with more of the type of radar that detected the AAVs? And is there any information that similar events have happened or are being censored by the government? So it looks like she has quite a few questions there. I think you answered a few of them, but let's start off with one. Does anyone know any more about the other objects seen initially, and did anyone tape the returns of AAVs that would drop from the 80K to hover about 50 feet off the water in a matter of seconds in similar acrobatics?
So from what I understand, nothing was taped, nothing was recorded. So the only video or the only recording that was sent back to Third Fleet Intelligence was that video from the second wave of Hornets that went out, the Tic Tac video that we all know and love at this point. The Princeton, as far as I understand from Dave, the Princeton Spy One radar tapes, they don't record that, or if they do, they just tape right over it. It was unremarkable at the time. So no, there were no other tapes.
And have you heard about how one of our other questions was, because we're skipping past the jamming indications because you already went over jamming and you already went over. Go ahead.
Yeah, so specifically, the indication of jamming, at least on that video, on the FLIR video that you see. So when you're closing in on a target, you get what's called a V sub C, a velocity of closure, and that will pop up on your radar, and it'll show the velocity that the two objects are coming towards each other. So your speed. Say you're going 300 miles an hour, and the other object is coming at you 300 miles an hour. Your V sub C would be 600 miles an hour. One of the strong indications of jamming is a V sub C of 999, at least in that piece of equipment that they had that day, which means basically it's not getting any data. It's not getting enough radar return or information to be able to build a track file that would say, this is our closure on this thing. So there were a couple other indications of jamming that I think are classified, so I'm not going to go into those. But that's an easy one, and it's on the Tic Tac video itself. You can see the 999s there.
Okay, and then we already kind of went over why you think radar was unable to lock on the objects when it was so close. Go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt you, Chan. I know that it wasn't. I don't know why. And there's basically two explanations for the inability to lock on something. One is that it's stealth, right? Like a modern stealth fighter, that it's designed in such a way to either absorb the radar energy or deflect it elsewhere so that it doesn't go back to its source, right? To pick up a return, a fighter plane needs to send out energy from its radar. It bounces off the object, the target, and comes right back to the fighter plane. If it's bounced up into space or elsewhere, then you don't get that energy back. You don't get any radar returns. You have no information. So that's one possibility, is that it was some sort of very sophisticated stealth, and the other is that it was using jamming, or both, right? I mean, the F-35 fighters use both. They use jamming and stealth. So that they're not picked up on radar. So
okay, so I would like to ask you a kind of a point blank question, because I'm confused and I'm going to come across as a novice here. So bear with me.
Go for it.
If Commander Fravor believes that this could be ET technology, could be a related technology regarding the Tic Tac, and you believe it's not.
No. I didn't say that. I didn't say
okay,
that.
So then. Thank you for correcting me on that, by the way. Let me just ask you, do you believe that this Tic Tac was ET technology related, or the technology may have been derived from ET related technology, or it was our technology or another first world government's technology, and it was in our airspace, or other? Which of those do you think it was?
Well, I mean, it's 100% conjecture at this point. I don't have the information to really give you a solid answer. Dave believes it's from another world. I'm going to put a lot of credibility into that, because he and his other three eyewitnesses saw it, and he was a fighter pilot for 20 years. He saw things that flew all the time, and that was his job. I don't believe it's U.S. tech or U.S. tech that's developed from a UFO, because we're not a country that's really good at keeping secrets. We're a very open society. Somebody would have said something about it. And we've been developing this, what is considered the most expensive weapon system ever built, the Strike Fighter program, for the last 15 to 20 years. If we're developing another even more expensive and something that would render the F-35 completely useless, it makes no sense to me, right? Why would you do both of those things? Kinds of build a wall, build a balloon, build, Fantasy Island, whatever. It's trillions of dollars that you're spending and wasting. So for the same reason, I don't believe that it's a foreign powers technology, because something of that magnitude, you wouldn't use it in the way that it was used off the coast of San Diego as a demonstration of force, or as a demonstration of technology. And there's been no follow-up on it. So why would you do something like that? If it was Chinese, why would they fly it over to San Diego just to have it do a quick turn with the Nimitz and go home. I mean, certain assumptions can be made without that time and expense.
Just a comment. I wanted to make a comment, and that is, and I'm sure it doesn't bother you in the least when I say this, but I think some people might wrestle with you a little bit regarding your perspective on how the government may not be able to necessarily hide something like that very easily, or technology like that. I think some folks believe in and out of the UFO community that the U.S. government has quite easily, according to their perspectives, kept secrets very easily regarding certain topics. But what I was going to ask you is just another question from Dr. Arena, and that is, have you heard anything about how even newer radar performs?
I haven't, and I think the Spy 1, from 2004, in terms of radar technologies, is not really that long ago, and it was a brand new radar at the time. I think that was pretty much the most sophisticated thing on the planet. So I don't know. I don't know that there've been other. I don't know that there've been other encounters, to be honest, that involved a ship with a radar picking up stuff like that. So nothing that I've heard.
Okay, I'm going to defer my questions to Frank. I'll let him ask, and then
we're talking a little bit about the radar, and apparently there was an E-2 Hawkeye radar plane that was at least up in the air. And can you explain to the folks a little bit? It seems like everybody's got their own radar set. The individual jets do, the ships do, and then there are these E-2 Hawkeye planes. And what is their role when you've got the planes up in the air? Are they always up in the air? Tell us a little bit about the role that the E-2 planes have in terms of running a carrier group.
Sure. So you're right. Everybody's got a radar. Everybody down to the missiles themselves have radars on board. So, and each of those radars has a different role. So the Princeton is in charge of the Fleet Air Defense, the Strike Group Air Defense. So it's really designed to primarily protect the ships in the Carrier Strike Group from inbound targets, whatever they may be, and to be able to shoot what's called a SM-2, a Standard Missile 2, out and shoot down, whatever enemy is coming at you. That's the simplified version of what the Princeton's job is. The E-2's job is to be the overall sort of God's eye view quarterback of the aerial battlefield. And when you go into a combat action, you launch the E-2 first, and it's a slower airplane. So it launches first, and it goes out with an escort to get close enough to wherever the action is going to be. And they've got this huge radar that spins on top, like it looks like a big flying saucer. And it is able to pick up, like I said, the God's eye view of what's going on. Now the fighters will launch, and they'll check in with the E-2, and the E-2 will say, "Hey, why don't you head west? Because there's 4 fighters that you've got to, target." And we see them, and we're putting you guys in charge of that group to the west. And then the next guys will check in, and they'll say, "Hey, you guys go north. There's another group to the north. You guys go north." And once you're targeted by the E-2, then the fighters at a certain range can pick up the threat on their own radars, and then they do the fine tuning of whatever intercept or military action needs to take place. And then, as I mentioned, if you shoot a missile, the modern missiles, you launch them at a target many tens of miles away, and in the end game, they turn on their own little onboard radars, and they guide themselves into the target all by themselves. So, the radar is used in a variety of different functions throughout the battlefield.
And back to you, Chant.
Okay, great. Yeah, I did have a question, actually, and that is this one again from the Phoenix MUFON team. They actually gave quite a large list of questions, but I'm only asking a fraction of them. And thank you for your patience. Did Commander Fravor only see the Tic Tac, or did he also see the fleet that was positioned higher up in the sky?
He only saw he saw the Tic Tac, and he saw that disk of water that was disturbed beneath the Tic Tac. So the way that played out is, he and his wingman and the other Hornet, piloted by Colonel Kurth, were vectored at the same contact. Kurth flew over it and left, and all he saw was the disc. And then, obviously, Fravor and his wingman flew over the disc of water. And that's the first thing that they saw, that bubbling disc of disturbed water. And as soon as they noticed the Tic Tac hovering and zipping around over the water, and the Tic Tac seemed to take note of them, the ocean went smooth. So that's what everybody saw. I've never heard any evidence that there was more Tic Tacs present at the moment. A fleet of them up high. That's new to me. I'm not saying it didn't happen. It's just not present in the report, and nobody's ever really mentioned it. That was in a position of authority.
Okay, this one is from Jan Aldrich. He is a well-known researcher and historian in the UFO community. He's researched this topic for almost 6 decades now. He runs what's called Project1947.com, and wanted to ask you this question, and then he has an explanation for it also. Your opinion of the SCU report, that would be the Scientific Coalition of UAPs. They wrote up a report on this. I don't know if you're aware of that. I did send you the link on it. They called it the 2004 USS Nimitz Strike Navy Group Incident. And the Scientific Coalition for UAPs did analysis of the evidence and resulting conclusions that they had on that. Did you get a chance to review that report?
I'm sorry, but you could synopsize it in a couple seconds if you want.
Okay, well then let's move on, because Jan had another, I think it's another question, wanted to ask you comments on what appears, meaning your comments, on what appears to be a perversion in Jan's eyes, I believe his perspective. Your comments on what appears to be a perversion of the FOIA process by the military in this case. When I asked him what he meant by that, he said this. According to Paco, the day he called Commander Fravor in 2015, Fravor told him the Office of Naval Intelligence had just left after investigation on the 2004 incident. Every Navy activity reported no record. Some Navy and USMC personnel in the FOIA process knew of the Tic Tac incident. 2, that was number 1. 2, he said, go ahead. Please go ahead.
Let's talk about one at a time before I forget the first question. So to clarify what I said earlier, I did say that the ATIP investigation was 2015. Dave corrected me. I talked to him recently, and he said it was actually in 2009, but he had heard about it, or when I called him in 2015, he had just heard about it or gotten the results or something like that. So the actual investigation took place in 2009, so 5 years after the incident, not 9 years after the incident. So the folks in the Navy, according to this ATIP report, did everything correctly. They sent, the intelligence community sent their report up to Third Fleet, and Third Fleet received it and didn't really know what to do with it, and it just stayed in a pile of messages that eventually were superseded by the tens of millions of other messages that come through that office. Nothing ever happened again to make them go back and look at it. You know what I mean? So if say there was something else that had escalated this incident, they would have been able to go back and revive it at a certain amount of time. But I think it just went away. It was this radical incident that people didn't know how to wrap their heads around, and there was no procedure in place to really take note of it properly.
Okay.
So let me jump in before you change subjects.
I was just reading the last comment that he had. It wasn't a question. It was just a comment by Jan to Paco. And that was, he said, "We FOIA'd the 1954 filming of UFOs by the balloon and a Navy chase plane. The request was not general, but for info on a specific incident. The answer was a general press release on the Moby Dick balloons. Also, it said that any appeal was denied in advance. The Inspector General is usually interested in activities which are not doing their job or acting improperly. The IG takes the incompetence part. I expect items dealing with UFOs are probably collected, sequestered, so the original activity can honestly say no record." That was his comment. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, and just in the news within the last couple of years, within the last year, was an apparent very wide open change in Navy policy, basically saying if you deal with something like this, some kind of anomalous aircraft or whatever the case may be, we want that report. And what did you think about that change in policy?
Well, I mean, I think it makes perfect sense. We've had obviously Dave's incident, and then off the coast of off the East Coast, off the Roosevelt, I think it was, there was another series of incidents, caught on FLIR, and so the Navy wants to know more, and it makes perfect sense. It's we have procedures in place to deal with things that we know of, and when we learn of new things, new threats, new curiosities, we have to develop new procedures to deal with them. It's an enormous organization. It's the military in the U.S. is the biggest bureaucracy in the world. It's not. I think to think that there's something nefarious going on in the Navy with normal Navy people. I mean, from my point of view, is comical because I've dealt with these people my whole lives. But I understand, perhaps from an outsider's point of view, that they think, well, somebody's withholding or hiding or lying about what they know.
So I was listening to an interview that you did, I believe, with Jim Breslow. That was a wonderful interview, by the way. And you mentioned that that's just not how the military does business. Now, wouldn't you say the same thing, and again, in this respect? And that is, there was a theory going around the UFO community that possibly DARPA was performing a test on technology regarding the Tic Tac as a type of sort of a social or military readiness test, or that it was a secret test by some other faction of the U.S. government. Now, I'm confident that you may say that's just not how the military does business. Wouldn't you say that?
Yeah, I mean, that doesn't ring true to me in even the slightest manner, because I think we touched on this earlier. There's basically no logical reason to design a test of that nature, especially if you're dealing with something so expensive. It doesn't make any sense. Nobody would do something like that.
Yeah, and I understand that the ships, by the way, had no weapons during that period of time for a reason. Can you explain why that is?
Well, the ships have weapons on board. They have a magazine and an armory, and those things have a supply of weapons.
Well, I think not to interrupt, but I think she means the jets themselves. They were unarmed at that point.
That's
during
correct.
the encounter.
Thank you for correcting me. Yes, that's exactly what I meant. And then also, Paco, you described a ship like an apartment building in an interview. Can you please explain why that is, so our listeners can understand why you would do that? Give that kind of a description of a ship like an apartment building.
Oh, yes, I remember what you're talking about. So, the fighter planes only put weapons on them when they are in a combat zone. And the reason that you do that is just pure safety. The way we practice and train is developed over time, and it's refined over time due to things that have happened. And at a few times in our past, guys would be out training with live weapons on board and accidentally switch a weapon station on and shoot down another airplane. It's happened, you believe it or not. So unless we're going into a combat zone or doing a missile exercise or strafing or something like that, we don't have live weapons on the airplanes. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
yes,
absolutely.
And thank you for being so clear about that. I think that's a great metaphor also, so that the average layperson, so to speak, can understand a little bit more about that complex topic.
Sure.
Wanted to ask you,
But let me get back
Go
to
ahead.
your building
Yes,
comment question. So
please do.
that was specifically that comment was in reference to the aircraft carrier itself, and an aircraft carrier is in a lot of ways like an apartment building in the sense that you have a commander, or the captain of the aircraft carrier is the guy who owns the apartment building. So he's got this big, beautiful ship, and there's maybe 2,500 to 3,000 people that work for him on the ship that run the ship. All the way from the nuclear reactors to the screws to cooking food or whatever. And they own the ship. And then there's these squadrons that fly on board in the form of an air wing. It's roughly 9 squadrons that show up, and they are called the tenant commands, just like you would rent an apartment, to move into. Every time a ship deploys, the tenant commands move on board, and they literally bring everything. They bring, obviously the beds are there already, but they bring all their tools and their books, maintenance manuals. The squadrons have to decorate the ready room. I mean, you show up and it's just a blank room with chairs in it and whiteboards, and you have to bring your whiteboard markers and everything. So that and the air wing is commanded by a commander of the air wing, and he's also a captain. So you've got, on an aircraft carrier, you've got 2 captains of people of equal rank that work together to make the ship and the air wing work efficiently together.
Okay, and then we did have one last question from Ruben Uriarte, the Northern California director of MUFON, and his last question to you was: do you imagine, or could there be, possible consequences of any kind for military pilots who report their experiences to NGOs outside of the pilot's chain of command? I may not be reading that right, but I think really what he's asking, or can you read his inference regarding what he's actually saying there?
Yeah, no, I mean, there's none. I'm like, when I interviewed Dave, Dave was very public about what he saw from the moment he saw it. As were the people on the Princeton. That there was nobody that ever came and said, "Hey, keep this down." Nobody had to sign an NDA or anything like that. That didn't happen. And you're not, unless it's a government classified secret, which this is not, you can speak your mind about whatever you see.
Where were you stationed? By the way, this question's from listener Dean Ashley, who's an expert on FLIR and radar technology. He wanted to ask you, and by the way, he's a fan of yours, and he says that if you're ever in town where he's at, if you guys could go have a beer.
Sure.
Anyway, he said he wanted to ask you. I would first ask him, where was he stationed when in the Navy? When he was in the Navy. Okay, so he was stationed in the Navy in 1996 to 2000, I guess. Where were you at? He wanted to know. Where were you stationed at?
I was stationed, when I flew A6s, I was at NAS Whidbey Island up near Seattle. And then when I flew Tomcats, I was at Miramar down in San Diego. And when I flew F5s, I was a reservist, but I was flying out of Naval Air Station Fallon, which is up near Reno, Nevada.
Okay, he wanted to share with you that during that period of time, he was in Cecil Field. And then it says in parentheses SLAM-ER, and then end of parentheses, and then NEC was the MAD system, and he worked on Bullwinkle pods in Sigonella.
Sigonella, yeah, that's in Sicily.
Okay, yes. And anyway, and then he says the next question is, I would ask him if he thinks any of the @FLIR videos were digital. And he says, I'm under the assumption that they were all analog, and that there was a huge jump in infrared technology at the turn of the century, and it makes a difference. Comments?
Yeah, so this was in 2004. I'm pretty sure the AT FLIR, and for whatever reason people call it the AT FLIR. I'm pretty sure the AT FLIR was digital, especially since it was on a Super Hornet. I never flew with an AT FLIR. I flew with different types of FLIRs on the A6 and the F14. What it did not have was the ability at the time in 2004 to transmit live video elsewhere. So what would have happened is they would have landed, taken the drive that the AT FLIR recording was on, and then brought that in for investigation by intelligence. So in today's world, an AT FLIR can actually transmit live video. and it's usually used to transmit to guys on the ground so that they can make sure that the airplane is targeting something properly. So, the people that say that they saw AT FLIR video of the Hornets engaged with the Tic Tac in a 10-minute video, or I don't know what they saw, but they didn't see, they didn't see a VF-41 Hornet engaged with the Tic Tac. It's just not possible.
Okay, and then I have kind of an odd question for you. If you don't care to answer, that's no problem at all. But I wanted to ask you, do you think the United Nations, the UN, will ever pass any resolutions on the UAP topic? I ask you that because on December 1st of 1977, there was a proposal that was being asked to be passed by the UN regarding studying this topic. And it did not pass. There was no votes on it. So wanted to know, do you think that Congress or the UN may in the future, whether it be the near future or way off future, ever consider putting together some kind of study group with credentialed people that they feel are appropriate to studying this topic in its entirety or the best of their ability? Do you think that that's a possibility? And if so, when do you foresee that possibility and why?
I mean, certainly anything's possible. I envision that something like that would happen if we started seeing on planet Earth, around the world, lots of incidents like the 2004 Nimitz and then 2015 off the East Coast. If everybody started picking up these Tic Tacs and they, we were equally befuddled, then it would make perfect sense for us as a planet, as a species, to put our heads together and try to figure out what we were dealing with.
Okay, and before we wrap this up, because we're going to do that, I wanted to mention to you that I was listening to you during an interview. Again, Jim Breslow's wonderful interview with you. It was a great interview, by the way. You did wonderfully in that interview. You were very clear on everything. Thank you. I wanted to ask you about something you brought up, and that was you said that the gimbal video was to you, sort of a meh video, wasn't that crystal clear, and the Go Fast video was far more impressive to you as far as the crystal clarity of it, that it was insane, so to speak, I think is the word you used. Can you tell me why you think the gimbal video wasn't that great compared to, say, the Go Fast video, which may have impressed you more?
I think if I didn't say this, I meant to say this. So the Tic Tac video is kind of grainy and fuzzy, right, because it was so far away.
You did go over that, yes. Go ahead.
Yeah, so it's it exceeded the normal tactical range that you would expect to be able to use the AT FLIR for. The Go Fast video, to me, it could be anything. It could be a cruise missile that they're picking up, cruising over the surface. I chased a cruise missile once. And that's what it reminded me of. It could also be a Tic Tac. So I wasn't there. I didn't see it. I don't have any data on that. The gimbal video is the one that to me is quite remarkable. And all the assertions around that there was actually a fleet of these things with the gimbal ship in the middle that was rotating. Obviously, that's why it's called gimbal, gimbaling around like a top. That's the one that's, I think, of all the videos, there's basically 3 videos, right? There's the original Tic Tac, the Go Fast, and the gimbal. Of all the ones that are out there, I think the gimbal is the one that is most.
And you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. The most, go ahead. I'm sorry. There's a time lapse thing going on here. It's the most what? I apologize.
It's the most remarkable because it actually shows movement that you can discern that is clearly not anything that we're familiar with, whether it's of this world or not of this world.
Right, and that's what you said. Actually, you said that the Go Fast could be a cruise missile for all you know. You also said that you weren't sure. You said the gimbal one is insane if it's real and not a fabrication. I remember now. And you also said it's a remarkable video. And then you said the gimbal is different than the Tic Tac, and you went on to explain why. So yes, thank you for explaining that so clearly. So, Frank, did you have any last questions? Because I think I'm done with my questions. We were able to interrogate the heck out of Paco, and he did great.
Yeah, we sure do appreciate it, Paco. And we had a big day today, and we capped it off beautifully with this interview. I sure do appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, and I do want to let our folks know before Paco sends his goodbyes to everybody that there's some really important websites that they need to go to of Paco's, and that is fightersweep.com. Please go to fightersweep.com and check out Paco's articles, and also go to lionsofthesky.com and check out the wonderful book that he wrote that's getting accolades from really important people. And it's a great book. Please do check it out. Please do buy it. And for the holidays, probably would make a great gift. And then also wanted to mention that prior to writing Lions of the Sky, Paco published extensively in Aviation Classics magazine and AOPA magazine, and of course Fighter Sweep, as well as creating and producing the award-winning naval aviation documentary Speeds and Angels. Wanted to remind folks of that. And we just really want to thank you for the privilege and honor of interviewing you, and would like to thank you again for serving our great country. It's a great sacrifice, and we are very grateful to you for doing that.
Well, again, it was my pleasure. I enjoyed every minute of it, and thank you for having me on. I appreciate the time here.
Did have one last question, Frank. I apologize. And that is, wanted to ask you if at any time, perhaps maybe sometime next year, if you wouldn't mind considering being on a panel. We have big panels. We have about 20 people or less on panels of experts around the world on various topics. And I wanted to know if maybe in the future you wouldn't mind considering being on one of those panels.
Sure, I'd love to. Where is it? Somewhere fun, like Honolulu or something?
No, right in your homeroom, right where you're at now, and you just Skype in.
All right. Well, thank you so very much for your patience and perseverance of this interview. We're very grateful to you. We've really enjoyed it.
Okay, my pleasure.
Thanks so much, Paco. I really appreciate it.
Goodbye, Frank. Thank you.
And that about wraps things up, folks. We will be back after this particular busy day. We'll be back this weekend with another show. And thanks for tuning in. And good night, everybody. Thank you very much.
Good night,
Bye-bye
everybody.
now.